Welcome to the Passion for Patients podcast. I'm Tonya Winders, your host and the president of GAP, the global umbrella organization dedicated to the mission of helping people live better and breathe better. Today, I'm so excited to welcome to the podcast Giovana Bier. Giovanna, or Gigi as I call her, is a nonprofit accounting expert who I've invited to share a few tips and tricks on the best practices in nonprofit accounting. Welcome, Gigi.
Thank you for having me, Tonya.
Great. So as we get started, first just share a little bit about your background and maybe how in your own life you're a passionate patient advocate.
Oh, that's such a good question because I'm originally from Brazil, so you guys are going to hear my accent, but I feel that I'm passionate about numbers. I feel that numbers tell a story if we know how to read it. And I think for nonprofits, it's such a powerful number because nonprofit accounting is so different than for-profit because it's more about accountability and making the best use of the money that they have to support other lives. And for-profit accounting is focused on profitability, the bottom line. So I think that the story there is a little bit different. And I am a person that comes from a family with a lot of health issues. And I know that sometimes there are invisible diseases that makes our lives a little bit difficult and be able to advocate for people to, understand it and know that not every disease, not every disability you can see with your own eyes. I think it's very
Right.
powerful so everybody has a better quality of life.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, sometimes we think, oh, it's only the things that we see, but there's every single one of us is going through something, seen or unseen, when it comes to our health. And if we're not a patient today, we will be tomorrow, I often say. So you're right, the numbers tell a story. And even when we have very limited resources as a nonprofit, it's important to use them wisely and to report them accurately. So, what are some of the best practices for nonprofits when it comes to fiscal management?
I feel that there are like several pieces, but we need to think about top to bottom line. And that's how I always think. It's very important to diversify revenue streams, not only solely focus on one corporate donations, for instance. You want to have individual corporate sponsorships, grants. You want to have that diverse way of supporting the cause. I like to think about it. And thinking about a healthy expense ratio, focusing on understanding how we can make better use of the money. There are going to be administrative expenses because it is a business, it's a nonprofit, but there are behind the scenes things that we need to account for. But we want to be smart. We want to use the resources that we have, the financial resources, the best that we can. And when I think about nonprofit accounting, it's about accountability. It's not about profitability. So we want to make sure that the financial statements are very clear, are very easy to understand, and that we know exactly what the money is being used for. So having transparency, accountability to build trust for all the stakeholders that are supporting the business and use data-driven decision-making to plan for a sustainable growth of the organization. I think that those things are very important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, transparency, accountability, that fiscal management, responsible fiscal management, doing the most with what you got, I think is the bottom line of what I hear you saying. And I think it goes to, a follow-up question in that are there certain thresholds? So we know that administrative costs are part of nonprofit fiscal management, but should we target like less than 20%? And what about fundraising versus actual program funding? Do you have any ideas there?
I think it's an amazing question, but my approach is it depends, right? And I think that as a accounting, as a bookkeeper profession, as a tax professional, this is one of the answers that we give our clients a lot is it depends because it will depend of the size of the organization. It will depend of the structure that it needs. If it's let's say a smaller organization where you don't have a physical location, we know that the overhead is going to be way lower than if you have multiple locations, if you're placed overseas. So I think that there is a flexibility within it, and that's why the transparency is necessary because I think it's important for your shareholders to also know what else do we need to keep this organization running. So I know I'm not giving an answer that people necessarily want to hear.
Like a hard percentage. But I think that's real, Gigi, right? Because again, it does depend. It depends on the country you're operating. It depends on the circumstance and the size of your organization. But I think the key, right, and at least in our work as patient advocates, is that most of your um, resources be dedicated to doing the core mission work, right? Not to fundraising, not to maybe paying rent, because we don't want to be rent poor, I often say. We want to be sure that we've got the ability to allocate the funding in a way that's going to make the greatest impact for the greatest number of people, persons living with these conditions. So when it comes to nonprofit budgeting and reporting annually, I know you primarily work in the U.S., but you've got this background in other countries. What are some of the things that you see are best practices or key learnings on doing nonprofit budgeting and reporting annually?
I think that the first thing is having, and I know I'm saying this word a lot, so it might sound like a broken record, but it's always focused on the transparency, right? So we want to make sure that your financials are as clear as they can be and that they're ready to be audited because you want people to audit because you want people to make sure to have that confidence that you're savvy and that you're making the best use of their money, regardless if it's fundraising, if it's corporated sponsorships, if it's individual donation. We always want to know, is this being used to the best of its capability, right? And I think that it is a very strategic process with its strategic goals. You want to make sure that if you have several programs under the umbrella of your nonprofit, that the funds are being allocated efficiently. We know that we have, secure funds, unsecure funds, restricted funds, non-restricted, restricted funds, and when
Yeah, can I stop you there for just a second? Because I
yes,
think even that fundamental basic, right, of restricted versus unrestricted. So, what's the real bottom line difference between the two? Because I think sometimes it's confused.
yes. So when we think about restricted funds, and I apologize for my English, there are some words that are still very hard for me to pronounce. Restricted funds are funds that must be spent on certain projects or activities. So when
Yes.
the donation is being made, there is this restriction is you're going to use this fund for project A. And you need to account for that. So you need to um, tag or allocate it to the proper fund to make sure that you're not misusing those funds that are restricted or for something specific. There is the temporarily restricted funds that are funds that should be spent on specific projects or activities until a certain period of time. After the
Yes.
time expires, they become unrestricted funds that are also known as your annual fund that they can use in whichever aspects of the organization that has the greatest need. So when we think about the income of a nonprofit, we also need to account those three ways that the income can come in. So you make sure that you have that clarity.
Right.
especially
Yeah.
for restricted funds, I feel, and temporary restricted. We need to have that clarity and that accountability that is being used as it should be.
That's right. And, I think that sometimes we think about unrestricted funds as really more that core work that's going to be done no matter what. You've got to keep the lights on, you've got to keep people paid, you've got to do some of those basic foundational things that may not be project funded or project based. But when you're actually doing proposals and putting work out for support, it's important that you allocate a certain percentage. And at GAP, we generally use kind of like a 10 to 15% of that unrestricted admin type of function in all proposals, because you still have to carry on that core work regardless. You still got to pay a bookkeeper and all those sorts of things. So, as far as reporting annually, every country is a little bit different. But like here in the US, we've got our annual 990 filing for nonprofits. And then you talked about an audit. Do you have to have an audit every year? Do you recommend having an audit every year for nonprofits?
I feel that I'm actually don't know if you're obligated to have every year. So that's something that I don't have an answer for that because unfortunately I don't know taxes. But what I feel is that when I think about general business, you do want to be audited as often as you can, especially for accountability. I think that it's important to have that information. And when you're filing your 990 form, it is again that accountability, right? Because the 501(c)(3)s are they're tax free, tax exempt. So you want to make sure that the information there is correct because it's a nonprofit, you have tax benefits. However, to keep them, IRS and the government needs to make sure that the funds and the business is running as it should be. And that's why accountability and transparency are very, very important. And it is my belief working for profits and nonprofits that what you want to have for your financials is an audit ready information because audit it's nothing to be fearful of, it's just to make sure that the data is correct. And if you have clean books, if you have the information readily available for the auditors, I think that it's so easy to be stress free.
Yes. And that's what we're striving for. More time for the mission, for the core work, less time worrying about the financial statements and, all of that piece of it. So, thinking about some of our member organizations don't even have a resource, for doing their accounting. They're sort of using it on an Excel spreadsheet or very basic format. But are there certain low cost, no cost tools? I know we're using QuickBooks Online in our work with you. There's a great solution in TechSoup that gives some discounts to nonprofits. But any other like tips or tools or resources that you think are helpful for nonprofits specifically in their accounting practices?
I am biased to QuickBooks Online, so I'm gonna say go to TechSoup to get the nonprofit discount because I'm biased. I think it's a very intuitive um, software, and it's a software that most accounting professionals worldwide know how to use. So it's not going to have a lot of dissonance if you have a tax team, a bookkeeping team, if you have auditors outside coming to look at your data. I feel that it's easy and intuitive. So I always recommend QuickBooks Online through TaxSoup. And TaxSoup is a way that you can find the best discounts for nonprofits. So that would be the place that I would recommend most people go to because their catalog is amazing.
Yeah, they've got so many different resources, not just for accounting, but for, all different types of tech solutions, right, for nonprofits. So TechSoup will drop that in the messages and the follow up materials for this podcast. So we'll definitely put that link out for people to access and get used for those. And so just maybe one or two final questions. Thinking about, do we have to do monthly financial statements? If so, should it be a cash flow? Should it be, a balance statement? Like, what are the one or two things that you think, as a nonprofit leader, I should be looking at on at least a monthly or quarterly basis?
I feel that it's important to look at monthly regardless of the size. And I just feel strongly about monthly reports because you can start seeing trends. Even if the volume of transactions are not great, you can see trends, and that helps you to better plan, budget, and forecast for the future once we see the trends, and also see dips and highs in the process, so we can always like better plan, because perhaps that every September there's a big fundraising and you're going to have higher funds in September, and that perhaps February is a lower month, so you can plan for those flows once you have that intimate relationship with your money. I
Mm-hmm.
like two statements the most. That is usually known as the income statement. That is pretty much the statement of activities, the money in, the money out in the organization. I like that because you can see that flow of how income and expenses are communicating. And I think that that's important, especially looking at expenses to make sure that every money spent is being well used and well allocated. And looking monthly at that is when you can make adjustments in terms of making sure that things are being tagged to the correct project, so on and so forth. I think that's very important. And I like the balance sheet because it just gives you an overall look of the assets and liabilities that you have. And I think for sustainable growth, you need to have a very healthy balance sheet.
Well, thank you so much, Gigi. It's been super helpful to hear some of these tips and tricks, definitely some of the different tools that you would recommend. Any final words for our listeners as we're wrapping up here today?
I feel that the word is money is not that difficult, it's not that complicated. It can be very simple. It's like when you learn how to read, you start reading easier books and you go to harder books later on in life. And with accounting is the same thing. Make sure you keep an open mind and making sure that you are as clear, as transparent as you can be, because that will really help the growth and sustainability in the long run to create a real legacy with your organization.
Thank you so much. That was inspiring and absolutely exactly what we were looking for today. And as we close this episode, I just want to thank Gigi for her passion for patients and for standing in the gap in this way of supporting that fiscal management for nonprofits. I also want to encourage you to share this podcast with other people, to like it, to post it, to share it, to definitely check back at some of those downloadable resources on fiscal management of a nonprofit, on the best financial tools to manage your nonprofit, the link to TechSoup and QuickBooks Online. All those things will be available in the show notes. I also want to encourage you to tune in next time when we'll be taking on another topic in nonprofit leadership. And until then, stay passionate.